Namaste, my friends. Welcome to our next edition of the Saturday public Sutra class. We will begin with our invocation. Yastyaktvā rūpamadhyam prabhavati jagataha Anikadha anugrahaya prakshina klesharashihi vishama vishadharaha anekavaktrasubhogi sarvajnana prasutihi Bhojagaparikarah Pritaye Yasya Nityam Devo Hishaha Savovyat Sita Vimalatanuh Yogado Yogayuktaha Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam Patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankhachakrasidharinam Sahasrashirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Patanjala Mahabhashya Charaka Pratisamskritaihi Manovakaya Doshanam Hartreya Hipataye Namaha Bhashyakrit Sutra Krichapi Nirmalantam Surupinam Dhyātāram Shripatir Nityam Patanjalim Namamyaham Om. So, my friends, we are in the second chapter of the Yogasutra of Patanjali, the Sadhana Pada. And in the last weeks, we saw the definitions of Kleśa-s, the 5 Kleśa-s which Patanjali describes, which are the causes of our affliction. And in the last week lecture, we discussed the sutra, Te Pratiprasavahiyaha Sukshmaha. That means the Kleśa-s must actually be eliminated, especially when they are in the small or subtle state. Today we are going to extend the next sutra, which is an extension of the same idea. Dhyāna heyaha tad vrittayaha. Tad klesha vrittayaha dhyāna heyaha. Now the Kleśa-s, they are acting as presented by Patanjali earlier in different levels. Prasupta, Tanu and Udara. They are acting in a big way, they are acting in a subdued way, and they are acting in a dormant way. So Patanjali says in the previous sutra, te pratiprasavehiyaha sukshmaha, he says that we have to make them impotent when they are in a small or subtle state, which means tanu or prasupta state. Now, we explored this sutra last time already, and it is very clear because when the Kleśa-s are big, it's very obvious that we have to deal with them. When the Kleśa-s are very subtle, it's not so obvious that we have to deal with them. Especially when the Kleśa-s are very subtle, it doesn't mean that they are not operating. And that is where this sutra comes. Dhyāna heyaha tad vrittayaha, tad klesha vrittayaha. Those activities of the Kleśa-s, those subtle movements of the Kleśa-s. Friends, Kleśa-s are operating whether we are conscious or not. Our fear need not only be conscious fear, like some people are very consciously afraid of a spider or a lizard or heights or claustrophobic environments, etc. They are very conscious of it. But there are also many fears, for example, that we are not very conscious of. Similarly, there are very simple desires that we are conscious of. There are desires that we are not conscious of. They are in the unconscious, subconscious structures. So every Kleśa has conscious and unconscious activities. Just because they don't seem to be operating at one particular level, it does not mean that they are not operating. This is true, especially what is called the vrittis of the Kleśa-s. That's what Patanjali calls as Klesha vrittis. Tat Klesha vrittayaha. Different acharyas explain this. What are the Klesha vrittis? Klesha vrittis are presented as Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada and Matsarya. Kama. Kama is lust. Now, sometimes we lust for things without even knowing that we are lusting for things. It's like a subconscious desire, a subconscious pattern that takes over. Now, we may intellectually convince ourselves that we are not lusting, that we are not desiring something, but deep inside there is that desire. That is what is called kama. Somehow it takes over. We have kama for food, we have kama for clothes, we have kama for material objects, we have kama for people. We desire people. We are sensually attracted to people. No, many people, they say they are in a marriage, in a relationship, but subconsciously they are also desiring other people. For example, when they watch a movie or something and they see somebody very attractive in that movie, there is a subconscious desire, even though they may not act on it consciously because they are consciously clear that they are in a marriage. Subconsciously, they may desire the person they are looking at. The same way, even though consciously we don't desire something to eat, subconsciously we may desire something. I take myself as an example. I made a commitment to avoid white sugar as much as possible because I took that choice for so many reasons. But every time I see somebody close to me enjoying some sugar, like for example, my wife is eating a chocolate cake, or my daughter is eating an ice cream, or my friends are enjoying a kulfi, there is a subconscious desire that says, oh, I wish I could eat that. Even though I don't eat it, there is that subconscious desire. That is what is called kama. There is an unconscious sensual desire. The same, what is called krodha. When we are angry with somebody consciously, it's very obvious. We show the anger. But sometimes we are not consciously angry, we are unconsciously angry, and we create certain behavioral patterns that is very clear to the outsider that we are angry, especially to the one receiving it. But we think that we are not angry. We even tell them, I am not angry with you. But actually, we are angry with them. Subconsciously that anger is playing because that anger is not triggered by them. That anger is being triggered, is triggering something in ourselves which is an unresolved past anger. I see this in many people. They tell me, I'm angry with you, Kausthub. Or they even say, I'm not angry with you, Kausthub. But even though they are saying, I'm not angry with you, I can see that they are angry with me. And that is not really an anger towards me. It's an unresolved anger from the past, either with their own parents or with their past relationships that they've had with friends or relationships, etc., or childhood anger that is not resolved, that is still there, that this unconscious anger is coming. This is what is krodha, a subconscious anger that is a movement from the klesha. Lobha is greed or kind of possession. We want obsession, we want things, we want to grasp things, we desire things, we want to accumulate things. Sometimes we see somebody else having something and we want that unconsciously. Even though we cannot have that, we want that. The neighbor buys a new car, suddenly we have this urge, oh, we also have to buy this new car. We may not be able to afford a new car, we may not even have the place to have a new car, but we have this greed, oh, I have to buy this new car. That is what is called lobha. This is also a klesha vritti. Then comes what is called mada, the destructive form of anger. Rage. Rage is also a klesha vritti. Sometimes we don't know why we are in rage. The person in front of us cannot create rage in us. The person in front of us can probably trigger the seeds of rage that are already within us. That's why it's very dangerous, because the seeds of rage are very subtle. They are unresolved. They are hidden inside us. So for some unexplained reason, we get so angry, we get so violent that we start expressing it in a destructive manner. And it's not really logical, because the other person in front of us is definitely not creating that rage in us. Sometimes what they may have said or what they may do may trigger that rage in us. That is what is called mada. It's a very fascinating word, because mada is resembling the English word mad. We become mad. We become mad with anger. We become so violent that we even lose ourselves. We behave in such a violent manner as if something else is taking over. The energy of anger, the energy of this rage takes over, that when we look at that situation, our own behavior later, we will not even recognize ourselves. Because by nature, we are not really behaving that way. But that's because there is some deep, unresolved anger, rage that is inside us in a very subtle manner, in an unconscious manner, that is operating. That is what is called mada. Then comes matsarya, jealousy. We become jealous of what other people have that we don't have. Sometimes we may even have that, but we are jealous that the other person has it. You know, our neighbor has a new car, we become jealous. We may not be able to have it, or we may even have the same car, but we are jealous that they also have. This is also coming because there is some unsatisfied need inside us that is making us feel jealous. It's not logical. It's really something that takes over. Now, all these, what is called the 6 klesha vrittis, kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada and matsarya. I forgot to explain moha. Moha is like delusion. We kind of get deluded completely. Now, this is also because at some point there is again something unresolved that did not resolve something clearly. For example, I used to have a student who always was afraid that somebody was always following him to hurt him. Now, this was not the reality. Sometimes when he would come to my office, he would always check under my table, open the cupboard, look inside the cupboard if somebody was hiding. He was completely in delusion that there was always somebody behind him, chasing him to harm him. Now, this is because of a trauma that was inflicted on him when he was very young, that was not resolved, that continues to operate in him. That's why I wanted to say that all the 6 Klesha vrittis, they're all coming because of unresolved vasanas. Vasanas are subconscious impressions that we have accumulated from our past. We have all experiences from our past. Positive experiences as well as negative experiences. Positive experiences do not create kleshas and klesha vrittis. Whereas negative experiences, especially if it's left unresolved, creates the kleshas or amplifies the kleshas and amplifies the klesha vrittis. So that's why many times when we have unresolved trauma, which most of us have, the klesha vrittis start to have a potency and a power, and they are operating at an unconscious structure. Many of us, we also repress and suppress our traumas. We don't necessarily want to deal with them. We don't even want to remember them. This is a very classic example. It is called repression. And sometimes we don't want to deal with it. We even try to forget it. But just because we don't want to remember it or we forget it even, it does not mean that the impression is not there. Just because you are slipping the dirt under the rug, it does not mean that the dirt does not exist. It is existing. It is influencing the rug. Whether you like it or not, whether you see it or not. And that is what happens to our vasanas that are staying unresolved. They are affecting us. And we will not be able to see that until we go to that state where we can see them. That's why in the previous sutra, Patanjali says, well, make the kleshas reduced. Now, the more we reduce the kleshas, the more the clarity starts to come up. Patanjali presents it in the later sutras. Ashuddhikshaye jnana diptihi. When the kleshas start to come down, clarity starts to come up. When clarity starts to come up, it doesn't mean that we are going to be happy and enlightened beings. When clarity starts to come up, we will start seeing our own problems. We will not blame the other. Sometimes it's very easy to blame the other. We always say, you make me uncomfortable, you make me uncomfortable, you make me uncomfortable. But it's actually not the other person. It's some unresolved problem that we ourselves have. That's why we blame the other, because we don't want to see that. Now, when the kleshas are reduced, the clarity starts to come. We will start to see, oh, you know what? There is some problems in us. There is some problems in us. That is what we have to resolve. And that problem is coming because I have not paid attention to it. And that is why Patanjali is presenting this sutra, Dhyāna heyaha tadvrittayaha. Vyasa explains it with a beautiful metaphor. Vyasa says, sometimes when we have to wash clothes, for the gross dirt, we do some rinsing with soap water and rinse it. The gross dirt is going away. But when there are some stains which are very stubborn that they are not going away, we have to focus very intensely on that area and apply some maybe soap or some natural cleansing products, and we have to give some extra effort to remove these stubborn stains. And Vyasa is comparing this. The gross kleshas can be reduced through what is called the Bahiranga Sadhana, the external practices that Patanjali is presenting. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama and pratyahara. Whereas the subtle stains, the more stubborn stains, they have to be resolved through Dhyānam, which means Dharana, Dhyānam and Samadhi, which are what is called the Antaranga sadhanas, the internal practices. They are more powerful, they are more potent, and they work at a very deep subconscious structures. So that is what is the significance of the sutra, Dhyāna heyaha tadvrittayaha. We have to remove these subtle impressions that are influencing us, the deep traumas that are influencing us still, through subtle practices only, that is called Dhyānam, which indicates Dharana, Dhyānam and Samadhi, the more subtle practices of the Ashtanga Yoga. Patanjali is presenting this because he wants to introduce the Ashtanga Yoga later. And he also wants to remind us that, okay, look, reduction of Kleśa-s is not the solution. Reduction of Kleśa-s is the first step. It's called Shamanam in yoga and Ayurvedic practices. It is pacification. Now, once pacification is done, then we can work with subtle and stubborn problems. But if we don't have the pacification first, then the subtle problems will not be able to deal with. We will not be able to deal with. I see this in my yoga therapy work. Many people, they come with emotional problems, psychological problems, spiritual problems, very agitated. At that time, if we tell them, you know what, the cause is actually something in you. Another person is not agitating you. Actually, what is agitating you is what is inside you, something unresolved, that you have to take responsibility, that you have to self-empower, that you have to put the effort to resolve themselves. They will not be ready to hear. They will run away. At that time, what they need is pacification of their problems, of their symptoms. So we reduce their symptoms using certain gross techniques so that they become a bit more calm, a bit more stable. Then they are able to deal with the more subtle problems, the more stubborn problems, which can come from within oneself. That is the approach that yoga is taking, where it says, we have to reduce our gross problem first, then deal with the subtle problems. It does not mean that when we have resolved the gross problems, the subtle problems are very easy and they will actually make you happy and it will all be fine. Actually, when we deal with the subtle problems, we may have more suffering than when we deal with the gross problems, because we have to do some self-inquiry, we have to take some self-responsibility. We can no more blame another person. And that is where we need to figure out the way, and we need self-reflection. That is what is Dhyānam. In this context, Dhyānam is reflection, self-inquiry, meditation on our own past, meditation on our own patterns. And that is very, very important, to look at our own problems and face them boldly, courageously, so that they will no more affect us long term. Now, to try to understand this sutra, I would like to give you an example. I learnt a lot by observing my father, Kausthub Desikachar, work with his patients one-to-one in yoga therapy. Now, one of the patients that he dealt with is fitting this sutra very well. The approach that Sir Kausthub Desikachar took with his student fits this sutra very well. Now, here was a young woman in her 30s who suffered from severe anxiety and insomnia. And she had this problem amplified every time her husband would travel for business. Her husband was working for a software company and he would have to travel to different parts of the country and also outside the country for work because he was in a very senior management position. Now, every time the husband would travel outside, the anxiety and insomnia of this lady would increase, would aggravate. Now, during the consultation and during the interactions that she had with Sir, it became very clear that her anxiety and insomnia was mainly because she did not really trust that her husband was faithful to her. And she always had this suspicion that her husband was not loyal to her. Now, the fact was very different. The fact was that her husband was a very nice person and very loyal to this lady, and he was just going on business. And I remember my father asking the lady, do you have any proof that your husband is actually disloyal to you? Do you feel that your husband is not faithful to you? Because he would say to her, women have this extra sense that they can actually feel intuitively these kind of things. It was not logical. The woman would always say, no, I don't feel anything, but I have this fear, I'm suspicious. Now, it became very clear that this was mainly coming because when the woman was very young, her father had had a relationship with some other woman that is different from her own mother. And there was a lot of conflict in the family because of that. There was separation between the father and the mother because of this. And this trauma was unresolved in the woman. And that's why it was very difficult for the woman to face this situation. Now, at this time, if my father had told the woman, Madam, this problem is not because of your husband, it's because of your unresolved trauma, it would never have helped her. She would not even have come back to yoga. She probably would have gone to some other therapist or some other therapy. Now, what my father took as an approach was very simple. He said, okay, madam, let us try to reduce your anxiety, reduce your insomnia, and let us deal with your husband's problem later. That's separate to this. He just approached it like that. He said, let us deal with them separately. Now, through some very strong practices of pranayama, some mantras in the pranayama, and some movements of the body, somehow my father could help her improve her sleep. Now, the improvement of her sleep was a very good benefit for her because that made her a bit more relaxed, because sleeping is a very relaxing state. You have to let go of many things. So slowly when the sleep improved, her anxiety also reduced. So over a period of time, this improvement of sleep and anxiety became more and more, established, and she became more and more healthy, had more energy, became more calm. A few months after this, my father slowly started to address this issue of her trust issues with her husband. He asked her, how are things between you and your husband? And the woman said, oh, it's fine, but I still sometimes have this feeling, So it is only at that point that my father started talking to her that, hey, look, maybe it's time for you to start reflecting why you have this suspicion, even though there is no proof and there is no evidence that your husband is behaving this way. You are even saying that you don't feel any difference. Maybe there is something deep inside you. It is only at this time that the woman actually could start looking at herself and say, okay, there are some unresolved issues. And that is when she started sharing a bit more about all her anxieties about her childhood experiences between her father and mother. And that is when my father had to again restructure the practices so that this could start to resolve the childhood traumas that she had, which are still unresolved. And that slowly was dealt with over a period of time. And these practices were mostly meditative practices, self-reflection practices. He also advised her to go to a psychotherapist to talk about her feelings and experiences. And so this combined approach of psychotherapy and yoga therapy was very helpful for this lady to deal with these very deep, stubborn vasanas that remain pending, that remain unresolved. And that is a classic example that justifies the sutras, that sometimes we need to use certain tools to reduce the gross kleshas. But still, it doesn't mean that when the kleshas are reduced, everything is very smooth. We still have to address the subtle, stubborn kleshas and their activities, which are hidden under the conscious structure, under the cognitive structure. And that is where we need deeply meditative tools. Our mind structure is like an iceberg. What is conscious, what is cognitive is only the tip. What is unconscious, what is non-cognitive is what is hidden below the ocean. In Vedic mythology, they compare the ocean as the metaphor for our mind and emotional structure, our psychological structures. So what is conscious is like this tip of the iceberg that we think we are all acting on, but there is so much that is in the unconscious structure that is really what is controlling our actions and behavior. We all think that it is our conscious structure that is controlling our activities and our behavior and our choices. It's not. This is coming from the unconscious structures where there is a lot of unresolved issues that need our attention. And only subtle tools of yoga like meditation can reach those structures. If you are following my Yoga Sutra series, you will understand that earlier we had discussed about the different kinds of minds. The subtle minds are only accessed through subtle tools of yoga like Dharana, Dhyānam and Samadhi. That's why if you watch, Patanjali uses very carefully the words for the mind. Chitta for Dharana, Pratyaya for Dhyānam and Samadhi. They are the subtle structures of the mind. So if we want to address the subtle structures of the mind, we have to use tools that can access those subtle structures of the mind. It's like when a doctor is doing surgery, he can use a big knife and big scissors to cut the external tissues. But when he wants to make fine refinements of little, let's say very small veins or arteries, he has to use a fine instrument, not a very gross instrument. The same way, when we have to deal with the kleshas at a gross level, we can use gross structures, gross tools. When we have to resolve the kleshas at a very subtle structure, we need to use subtle tools. And that's why, my friends, Patanjali is presenting this sutra, Dhyāna heyaha tadvrittayaha. The working on the kleshas is a long-term process. And when we have to deal with the subtleness of the kleshas, the subtle activities of the kleshas, we have to resort to the subtle tools of yoga. It's a very strong reminder, my friends, in today's world of yoga, where most people are obsessed with asana practices, especially doing asana practices in a gross manner, taking pictures of themselves and posting on Instagram and Facebook of different asanas against the sunset, against the waterfall, against the background of beautiful beaches. But that is not really yoga. Yoga is actually going in a subtle process inward. So this is very strong message that doing asanas in a gross way is not the only tool of yoga. There are other tools of yoga that we need to resort to if we really want to move forward in the spiritual path of yoga. That is the basic message of this sutra. Dhyāna heyaha tad vrittayaha. Namaste, my friends.